sure people will be joining. A few more, at least will trickle in. We've got a good number to go ahead and start, so let's do that. I want to talk first a little bit about how I've set this up. I really want to give as much time as I can at the end of this. We've got about an hour scheduled to do some Q&A and answer any specific questions that you have. Please use the chat for that. So if you've already chatted in your location, you know how to do that. Or if you've just been alive in the past few months with COVID, everyone's been doing virtual meetings. So I'm assuming you probably know how to use Zoom, but if you don't, just check down below. You'll see the option for the chat. You can open that up and chat in any questions as I'm going. And then another business partner of mine, Jen, is in the room with us. She'll be collecting those, triaging any technical issues. If you happen to have those, she'll do her best to help you with that. And then I will go over them at the end. And then what I'm going to do for the rest of the time is just run through this big list of tips. They're not quite hacks. They're really just kind of tips for ways to make your meetings better. Basil has a question about the recordings. Excuse me, will the recordings be available? I imagine so. Jen, if you're on, let me even see. Yeah, I don't see the option for me to start recording. Otherwise, I would just do it. But I'm assuming so. There we go. Yes, it will be available. Cool. So let's go ahead and get started. So upgrading your Holacracy meetings, how to be a better participant. Let's talk a little bit about that. First, just a little bit about me. My background is kind of in traditional management consulting. I have a doctorate in human and organizational learning from the George Washington University, and then I focused on leadership development as a consultant in the federal government, and then as an external consultant, and then joined Holacracy One about 6 years ago, doing Holacracy stuff. And now I'm a certified master coach, and I talk a lot about facilitation. I talk a lot about that at the forums. I write a lot about that as well. Tips for kind of practice in general, but a lot on facilitation. So a lot of what you're going to get from me today is recognizing the ways in which the participants in meetings can actually have more of an effect, or at least as much an effect as the facilitator or secretary. So also answer me this, how are your current meetings going? Haven't started the meetings, bad, but not sure why, kind of meh, good, why not make them better? Just type in 1, 2, 3, or 4. Curious. It'll kind of inform how I, tailor some of this content. I would imagine it would be a lot of 4, kind of the upgrading theme kind of implies that they're okay. You want to make them better, but yeah, 3 or 4 mostly. Yeah, some people just kind of getting started. Okay, cool. Great, that's really helpful to know. Cool. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go over kind of 3 thematic topics. We're going to focus specifically on governance, then specifically on tactical, and then we'll look at some tips and tricks that really apply to both meetings. The main point for the governance side is going to be encourage objections. You're going to see that theme throughout. The main point for the tactical is about making clear requests as the participant throughout. They're not exactly kind of parallel in that sense, but it's certainly the most important point, I think, out of a way to upgrade your meetings is to focus as a agenda item owner and a participant, getting good and taking responsibility for helping others help you, making your requests really clear so that people know what you're looking for and know how to help you. And then one of the points to cover both meetings is this term I call constructively disengage. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means because it's a bit counterintuitive from how conventional meetings work. And this is probably one of the biggest areas of efficiency I can see you can gain. One of the biggest upgrades you can make is to really embrace this idea of constructive disengagement for yourself and for others. They all have kind of a practitioner focus. They're not specific, none of these are going to be just for the facilitator or just for the secretary. The importance, governance I put as high and tactical I put as medium. High for the governance because of just given the structure, the awkwardness, so much discomfort with understanding how that structure works and how objections work, which is why the encourage objections is there as a principle in the philosophy. And then for the tactical practice, I put medium just because really there's a lot that goes on in tactical. You're just going to kind of do your best with it. And then the upgrade options, I was just trying to be cute and kind of keep it under this upgrade theme. So I just put 5. We're going to go over 5 points for each of these categories. Okay, so let's go ahead and start and look at the very first one for governance. Encourage objections to your own proposal. So this is specific to being a proposer in a governance meeting. This can be really, 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 really powerful for helping everyone in the meeting understand that objections are not to be taken personally. They are not a disagreement with the tension or what's even being proposed. They are none of those things. So as proposer, you can make your proposal, starting the first step and present proposal. So this is the tension. This is what I'm proposing to solve my tension. And then if you add something like, and I'm totally fine if people have objections to it. Like we can figure that out in integration together. That's the key. Remember that objections never stop you as a proposer from getting what you want. Okay? The thing that satisfies your need may be slightly different than what you started off with, but it will never stop you from getting your needs met. And that's the key energy to remember that allows you to kind of be embracing and encouraging of objections. Is if you think about it this way, if I'm hungry and we're going to a restaurant together and I order, the seafood platter or something, but then you say, oh, well, and you're sitting right next to me, oh, well, the smell of seafood makes me nauseous, right? That's like an objection. Okay, well, my need is that I'm hungry, right? Like the seafood thing was just one option. Maybe I order the hamburger instead, right? So their objection in no way stops me from getting my need met. It just might mean that there might be another creative solution to get that need met. So this is why you want to embrace objections. This is very true for facilitators, but as a proposer, you can have a tremendous power on everyone's understanding of how objections work when you make it okay, right? Worst case, it might delay some things. You get to have some sort of brainstorm together and integration if someone has an objection. So if you say it, it dramatically lessens the awkwardness of objections in general. And when you're doing that, again, you're not really doing it for your own sake as proposer, because in a way, right, you just need to be selfish and you're proposing something and leave everything else up to everyone else. Great, it's a perfectly fine stance to take. But again, part of the power you can have here is for the health of the circle in general. If you're not regularly getting valid objections and getting into integration, there's probably something wrong. That's what healthy circles are doing. They're getting valid objections, they're harvesting them, and they're integrating them to come up with solutions that don't cause problems for other roles. So we know for sure we're moving forward. So that's the first one, probably the most important one. Second one, first ask yourself, do I have a valid objection? And this starts from the very beginning, even from present proposal. Someone else now is making a proposal. The question you should be asking yourself immediately is, do I have a valid objection to this thing? And the problem is most of the time when someone, let's say they present something, yeah, I think we should do an annual conference and we can invite lots of people. So my proposal is either just to host the annual conference or a role to figure out how to do an annual conference, something like that. Often participants, our mind will first go to like, well, does that make sense to me? That'll be the question. Or do I agree with that? That'll be the question. But those are the wrong questions. You don't need to be asking yourself about the content per se, right? Like it's just someone else's idea that's going to solve a need of theirs. Nothing to do with that. What you want to be asking yourself is, do I have a valid objection to this? Like, would I? One could be, it's not in the proper format. It's not a change to a role or a policy, in which case you could raise an NVGO objection and then you could fix it together in integration. It could cause some sort of limitation on your role, in which case you can start thinking through those test questions. Okay, would it impact my role? Like if you see that create conferences and you think, well, that's just a really atrociously awful idea. You may then ask yourself, like, well, does it limit any of my roles from doing any of the stuff they were doing? And maybe not. And with that realization, you're going to make the rest of the process a lot more efficient. Remember that a valid objection is your direct pathway to ensure that any issue with this proposal will get worked out. Okay, the mistake is not asking yourself that question earlier, getting clear earlier, and instead letting your kind of reaction kind of leak out into clarifying questions, giving a long-winded reaction about how you don't really like it, which has no impact or shouldn't have any impact on what the proposer does. Reaction space is not a good space for that. If something needs to get integrated, that's an objection. And again, as I mentioned, that should inform your reaction. So if I look at that and I say, okay, they propose that we host a conference every year. And I think to myself, yeah, I don't even know whether or not that ultimately makes sense. Like just personally, if I think about it like a business case, but we capture it in the scratch pad and it just says proposal, we host a conference. Well, I can say, well, I know that's not a valid output as formulated. Maybe we could create a role or something to figure it out. But as is, that's not a valid output, which means I can raise a not valid output objection. So I've got that in my mind. So when it comes to my reaction, I can say, looks good. End of reaction, or no reaction. Why would I take up a lot of time with a reaction when my direct path is just to raise the objection and then we figure it out? The mistake is trying to explain this in the reaction to the proposer, right? Like that's not a valid output, you should change it. That's not the proposer's problem to figure out. You have done a good job of recognizing an issue. We use the process, raise the objection, clarify why, and then go into integration. Again, this is another really important habit, one that I would say even I see really experienced holacracy practitioners don't seem to recognize, and this could significantly enhance how many more proposals you can get through, and the overall just felt sense of comfort with objections can be a lot less awkward with this question in mind. Okay, third, give objection justifications to other roles during your reactions. So if you want to use your reaction round for anything, this is one of the best uses you can have. Is looking at a proposal, right? Let's say this creating of the conferences. You may ask yourself the question, do I have a valid objection? You may realize, well, not really. It doesn't really impact my role. But maybe there's another role, sales or marketing role, that's doing something that's kind of similar. We just added an accountability like 2 months ago for working through and figuring out kind of public outreach kind of events. And so I'm not quite sure if this role is now supposed to be doing something at the conference or if the conference would fall under that other role. So what you can do then as a reaction, right, and say like, okay, well, if I had the sales role, I would raise an objection to this because now it would be confusing about whether or not, like which role is supposed to be doing that. If you save that insight for an objection round, it's going to be an invalid objection because it doesn't directly impact your role, right? So why go through all of that, all those hula hoops of it, right? And just be like, okay, I recognize this potential issue. Let me just share this information to someone else. And again, you have the chance to make it clear it's not personal. This has nothing to do with the tension, right? Or the idea even. It's like, all I know is this specific thing that you're trying to get, the specifics of it is causing some issue for me. And I would like to think that you would want to hear that and that we could integrate it, which is exactly what the process is there for. So this is a really great use of your reaction round, is to help other roles sense into objections. Fourthly, make it clear that the proposer can completely ignore your reaction. If you're getting a sense of the theme here, drive, leverage, use, embrace, squeeze, hug, love, objections to the expense of reaction rounds. I emphasize that mostly because the most common mistake I see is the inverse. Let's try to cram as much as we can into the reaction round, good ideas, suggestions. Proposer then hopefully will integrate some of them and amend and clarify. But the reason we tend to do that is because we're just trying to avoid the objections. The objection round has been designed, it is there precisely for the purpose of harvesting any potential issues and verifying that this is an issue we must solve right now versus an issue that needs to be solved some other way at some other time. And then we have space and time to integrate it right here and now. So that's what the objections are about. Given that, if you're going to offer any suggestions to a proposer, any suggestions at all, be very sensitive to the energy that you're using when you convey that. This can dramatically, if you role model this well, and maybe even explain it, at different times, can really enhance the whole governance meeting experience. And the inverse is also true. If you neglect to do this well, you can make it a lot worse. So bad versions of reactions are to say, okay, well, yeah, this might make sense, but here's what I would do. I would change this, maybe the phrasing that you might want, instead of maintaining, maybe you really want like creating, because I don't think there's anything there currently. So it's probably more creating that you want, something like that. It's innocent enough, really. But the distinction is, again, you want to make it clear to the proposer that this thing that I'm offering you is purely for your own benefit based on the tension that you have described. Because if it's anything other than that, there's another pathway for me, right? So if I feel any tension about it, that's an objection, right? Straight up. If there's any tension about the proposal, right? That may be an objection. If by definition I have no valid objection to it, by definition, then I need to know that then that's okay. Maybe this has nothing to do with me, right? Maybe this is just someone solving their own issue, and I'll never have to think about this new thing that changed ever again. So if you're going to make some sort of suggestion, make sure it's very clear, and you need to do that probably explicitly with your words. It's not enough to just assume that the proposer knows that they can ignore it. I will often go through great lengths to make sure it's clear. A simple version might be like, okay, yeah, this looks fine, this looks good, or maybe this is the problem, whatever. But something like, you might want to consider, or maybe consider, or after you've explained it, say, but again, feel free to ignore that, right? It's only in case you think this helps you solve your tension better, right? It's purely from the spirit of offering a gift, and I would say even a pure gift, meaning you're not going to take it personally if they just don't want the gift, right? Like you just offered it like, hey, I brought you an extra napkin. I'm not going to take it personally if you don't need it. I just thought you might. And so I was there and I brought you one. That kind of energy. If you make suggestions that way in reaction round, fine. That's a great thing to do. It's still making it clear that ultimately, if you have any issue with it or anyone else feels any issue with it, they can raise an objection. And then finally, for the governance side of these meetings, you can always ask a facilitator to test an objection. I emphasize this because facilitators have a hard job in governance, and specifically with objection testing, right? It's a difficult thing to have to do. And participants in the meeting can actually help the facilitator in many ways that are often not used, maybe not known about, but certainly not used. And this is one of them. So one of the options that you have is you can ask the facilitator to ask the objector a specific test question. So maybe the facilitator is brand new. They just got elected. They're trying to learn how this all works. Great, fine. It's a great way for them to get experience. But now as an experienced practitioner, you're there and you're listening to them ask questions. And it's clear to you that something that the objector just said probably makes that objection invalid, and the facilitator either failed to ask it, wasn't really paying it, they were too nervous, they were looking at something else, who knows? You can just say, hey, facilitator, like I'd like to request you ask the objector this specific question. And again, you can do it from a place of generosity. Like, again, you don't want to have to waste time integrating an invalid objection if you don't have to. It may still be valid. Ultimately, like that's not a problem either. You're just trying to do a good job of, doing some safety checks here on whether or not the objection satisfies the criteria. And this takes a lot of pressure off of the facilitator to make sure they've cracked it, that they're the ones that have got all the pressure on them. This is not the case. As a participant, if you're there, if you see something, you can always say, ask that question. Again, you can't determine whether or not it's invalid or valid for them. If, facilitator doesn't even do that for the objector. But you can request a specific question if you think it'll be helpful for your facilitator. Another key here is the objections can always be retested in integration. So if you're in integration and you are listening just as a participant and someone gives an explanation or provides a little bit more data to their objection, and you've been talking about this issue for like the past 15 minutes and you don't seem like you're making much traction, and you get a sense that, maybe the part of the problem here is it's an invalid objection. Maybe it's not from their role, and so they're not really in touch with the actual tension. They're trying to kind of project into someone else's head what they think they might be feeling and then try to find a solution from there, but that's difficult to do. So you've got this really meandering conversation. Well, if you're there and you've got more experience and others, and you just, in that moment you have that insight, right? You could always suggest to the facilitator, hey, you know what? Could you ask that question? And when you do that, people are going to be like, oh, maybe he saw something or she saw something. Yeah, sure. Maybe you did. right? But you can ask that. That's a pathway that you have, and then see if that clarifies something. So this helps tremendously take some of the pressure off of the facilitator, who otherwise typically feels like they've got the entire world on their shoulders and they can't get help from anybody because they're supposed to be doing this job solely alone. And that's not really the case. They're supposed to be doing their job. Hopefully they got elected for a reason, but that doesn't mean that, you know, you as a participant sitting there seeing things don't have opportunities to help improve or upgrade the overall meeting process for the governance meetings. Okay, so that's governance. Let's look at tactical. So my first card here is take responsibility for making clear requests. The reason I emphasize this is partly because of just pure human empathy, because it's difficult to understand why other people might not understand what you just asked for. So it's partly just that I'm very in touch with that human experience, and partly because I see the difference that it can make when you're able to make a clear request versus, let's just say, an unclear request. Now, there's no such thing as perfect clarity, but think about this example. Imagine if I'm in a tactical meeting as a participant and the facilitator says, all right, Chris, your agenda item, yeah, what do you need? And I say, okay, great. Yeah, we had this big problem last week. The client came in, we did not have enough materials ready, and it was just a complete disaster. That just shouldn't ever happen. Silence. Silence, possibly for a lot of reasons, but at least one is probably like, okay, people are thinking like, okay, Chris, sure. What are you looking for from us? Are you sharing that just to be heard and understood? Like, oh yeah, that did suck. That's unfortunate. Yeah, totally. Or are you looking to brainstorm ideas about how it can be improved or figure out whose role, you know, is involved? Did you want to talk more about the specifics of why that might have happened? Like, we're here to help you, but you know, you're just not making it very easy for us to help you. I'm reminded very much of like a nonviolent communication kind of prompt or principle around people wanting to make your life more wonderful. It's essentially the same kind of principle here that I'm trying to explain, of like the default assumption being that actually people are tripping over themselves trying to find ways to help you. The problem often is you're just not making it easy for them to help you because you're not telling them what would help you. You're assuming that they already know. So this is part of what it means to take responsibility for making a clear request. So instead of just kind of explaining the problem, right, I might have said all of that and then said, so I guess what I'm looking for is some brainstorm because I'm frustrated and I'm not really sure what to do with it. Who has ideas? Whoa, okay, well that's so much easier to engage with, right? You're making it very easy for me to help you. That's what this means. So help others help you. That's the essential nature of it. If you're not getting immediate responses, you know, maybe it's because they're not sure what you need. So you can even always say, I'm not sure what I want or what I need here. That's perfectly fine. That is a clarification, right? That helps tremendously to know the context of the agenda item owner. It's like, yeah, I'm looking for help on getting clarity. Or, you know, I don't want to have to go look this information up. Can someone help me with that? Does anyone know off the top of their head? Like, I can still look it up myself if I need to, but I'm trying to save myself some time here. Does anyone happen to know? Right? That kind of language makes it very clear you're taking responsibility and you're doing your best to try to make a clear request so that others can help you. Okay, let's look at another tactical one. Add agenda item and then request it go next. I really love this one. It's kind of a two-part like move, really. For experienced people in tactical meetings or experienced circles, you may often see this. In new circles, maybe less so. So, you know, for those of you who are in that boat, really pay attention to this one. This is when someone else has an agenda item. They're trying to get their needs met. And you sense the thing that you want to talk about or contribute might not be exactly what they want to be talking about. That could either be because the conversation is starting to like shut down. They were like, okay, I want to hear ideas on something. A lot of people have said a lot of ideas. And then you're like, oh, I have this other thing that I really want to talk about and share with them because I think it might really help them. And they're starting to be like, okay, yeah, I think I'm good, right? They're starting to kind of close down the item. If you're not aware of this move, you may be inclined to try to now shove that idea onto their item because here we are talking about it. But here, what you just do is you just quickly add it to the agenda, right? If you're logged into Glassrog, you just type it in, your own little item. It'll, you know, follow on the list down below, and then call it out to the facilitator, right? Mention it and say, hey, can this one go next, right? Like, wait, that person's like, check on the item. You're like, okay, like now I have attention, which was I wanted to share this idea and not feel rushed and just have space to talk. So I just added this agenda item. Can you prioritize that going next, right? Boom, so simple. And it really gets you out of a lot of the loose discussion or discussion that's not quite clear who's making the decision or what actions we're looking for, or any of that. Because different people's tensions are all mixed in to one person's agenda item, right? Recognizing, like, if I ever want to just talk about something, I have a direct pathway, which is add my own agenda item. And then the nuance to it is making sure you ask the facilitator to prioritize it so that you're not getting this completely disjointed thing. Just because you're adding your own agenda item doesn't mean you have to sit on it and track it for 30 minutes before you bring it up. Right? Just say, hey, can you prioritize that? Because it's exactly the same topic. Cool. Number 3, use key phrases to freely share your opinion. Now here, because so much of Holacracy is intended to be able to distribute power and authority, so people aren't sitting back and giving over their own authority to make decisions and use their best judgment to someone else. One of the misconceptions about that is people will kind of naturally start to withhold feedback and ideas for concern that others will interpret it as a mandate or a requirement in some way. So the way to get around that is just make sure you use some key phrases. You can say a pitch or consider, like maybe you should consider this, or I have a strong pitch for you, which helps clarify the level of confidence you have in the idea. Right? Consider might be just like a light thing. I just thought of it. I don't really care. Pitch might be, I really feel strongly this would be the thing to do, but it's still making it clear ultimately that it's someone else's decision. These are ways that you can just constantly be sharing feedback and opinions without worrying that people are going to misconstrue it as a mandate. And this is especially the case for anyone who's in the lead link role or a former manager. If you're coming from a conventional kind of structure now into Holacracy, you can always make it clear, like, listen, I don't have the authority to make this decision for you, right? Like me sharing this idea of like, maybe it would be good to have that event on Thursday. Please don't misunderstand that I'm now asking you to make that event to reschedule it for Thursday. I'm just talking. I'm just talking because I'm trusting that you're going to be hearing what I'm saying and hearing other people talking, and you are discerning out of all that what makes sense because you're the one who has all that information. So I'm just sharing information, but I'm hoping that information is getting factored in and getting triangulated with lots of information so that you can make the best decision. So you don't have to worry about withholding that so that you can empower others and just let them make a mistake that you could have foreseen coming, right? Like they have the right to hear your opinion and ignore it, but there's no reason for you to withhold that as long as you're clear, like, I don't have the authority to make the decision. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what I would do, right? That kind of language can really help. And because the tactical meeting is just a microcosm of all of Holacracy practice, I call that out specifically for tacticals. Okay, here's another one. Ask yourself, who has agreed to do this work? Now, I like this question. It's really an alternate way to start identifying kind of like whose role is this? So that's the common kind of version of the question you might hear in a training or a new practicing group of like, okay, well, whose role? What role? What role are you coming from, right? Great. We need the role structure to be useful for us day to day. So the fact that it would come up in a tactical is a really great sign. We need to be relying on that so we can move more quickly. The challenge, though, is sometimes just that question, which role, or do you know the role, or any of that, isn't kind of clear enough. Kind of back to that request thing I mentioned earlier. Sometimes there's more efficient clarifications, really. And this is one of the ones that I love, is if an issue comes up, right, asking yourself that question, like, well, who has already agreed to do this kind of work? Think of the role structure as like a collection of contracts. And the role filler has consciously agreed to fill that role with those expectations. They have pathways to object to changes. So at a very minimum, right, they're consenting to having those expectations placed upon them. Meaning, if you want to get something done and it falls in somebody else's role, you really shouldn't feel any hesitation about asking them to do that. They've already agreed to care about those kinds of things. So this is a way to understand and to kind of demonstrate your understanding around what the role structure really represents. People have already agreed to care about this kind of work. So if something comes up and you're not quite sure, this should be one of the first questions to come up with, like almost any tension, especially again, if you're in a just day-to-day or in a tactical, of like, which role is supposed to be caring and figuring this out. So it's really kind of the true meaning of what a role is. Another kind of slight variation is whose decision is this? It's really more about the authority per se than so much like the expectations. It's like, all right, this is an issue. This thing that just came up or what happened last week was an issue. I want to now know who I should be talking to, right, in the tactical space, or again, just the operational space. Like, who's making these kinds of decisions? This happens, you know, in Holacracy 1 in my roles all the time. We get together with different roles, maybe several. You know, I have several. Rebecca has several. We're talking about a training thing. And through that kind of appropriately loose and creative conversation, we hit upon, you know, something needs to be decided. The length of the training, some sort of change to the logistical kind of design. And I have a design role and she kind of has a logistics role. So it's not immediately clear whose decision that is. It's the exact same thing. Like, okay, which of our roles, like which role makes that decision? And that can be the person making that decision. And if I know that, then I can be in a better position just to inform them. It's actually super relieving, right? To be like, it's not my decision. Now I can just give you all sorts of my ideas and trust that you're, you know, weeding your way through that and harvesting what's useful. So this question of asking yourself who has already agreed to do that work can get you out of having to worry about a lot of stuff, because you can just find a role that's supposed to be worrying about it. They've already agreed to worry about it. And you can just make a request for a project, which again can just be an outcome of any type. You could just say, I want this to be different, right? And request that from that role and move things forward. Okay, gather data for a decision that you need to make. So this is kind of the inverse of the sharing your opinions freely by using key phrases. It's still, I talk a lot about language, and it's going to show up here too. Like, there's better and bad ways of trying to gather data for people that are, you know, clear or less clear. So here, make it clear by using something like for my decision. Like, I'm looking for some information or some opinions. My agenda item, what do you need? Yeah, I want to get some opinions and some thoughts. Or reactions from folks? I'm trying to make a decision on something, and I want to know what you think. No problem, right? That doesn't mean people are making the decision for you or mandating. No, you're making it very clear. I get it. I have a decision and it sucks. This is a hard one. I'm not quite sure what to do. And it's mine to make. So I've got to, you know, I'm going to take my time with it. I really want to know what others would do. A perfectly efficient way of having lots of information shared while still maintaining the integrity of the expectations and the authority structure that we've worked so hard in the governance meeting process to make sure, you know, represents kind of how things actually should be working. Another version of this is I need to decide something, as I mentioned, and I'm looking for thoughts and opinions, right? This is a really fantastic way of prompting things. And it tends to liberate more creativity and brainstorming, actually, because when you compare it to, let's say, not doing this, and you just say, what, you know, this is the thing, what do you guys think? It's not actually kind of clear. People are going to have to do their own little, it's usually unconscious filtering of like, okay, if I tell them this idea, does that mean they're just going to go and do it? Or are they just going to be, you know, filtering it, editing and, you know, digesting it themselves and then figuring out what to do? So that internal filtering that other people are doing means you're putting a speed limiter on the creativity of everyone that you're asking. If instead you say, I need to make this decision, I want to hear your ideas, right? They can be as wild and as stupid, whatever that you think they may be, because I know I don't have to do any of those, right? Like, I'm here to make that decision. So it's a great way to get through some sticky items in tacticals. Okay, so that's tacticals. Now let's look at a few of the kind of main, I guess, upgrade options that really apply to both meeting types. They're not specific. So I mentioned this before, constructively disengage. This is one of the big ones for me for this entire presentation. If you get nothing else, is remember this, constructively disengage it means that in certain aspects of these meetings, not being involved is a very good thing to do. In the conventional meeting space, typically, right, where we kind of have to go to meetings, one, so we're there anyway, and we want to make sure it's clear to everyone that we're adding value to that meeting, right? If I'm distracted the entire time, then it's like, well, yeah, why? Clearly someone doesn't, you don't think that it's worth them being there even though your boss thought that it was, or you're not adding enough value or something. So you've got a lot of incentive to ask questions, give ideas, right? Just be involved, be engaged. But that's not the case with Holacracy meetings. There are several points at which you stepping back, if it has nothing to do with you, is a really good move. Again, this is a difference just fundamentally between the meeting types and the conventional system. Those meetings are often to get a sense of agreement, consensus, a feel of like a certain decision or a certain change to something. Like everyone's there, they get a chance to kind of voice opinions and concerns, and that kind of tacitly means there's a certain kind of consensus to that, or at least consent to that operational decision. Well, in the Holacracy meetings, we're not doing that at all, where our agendas are not topics to kind of discuss and get agreement about. They're individual tensions that individuals feel that they are looking to get solved, which might mean that in a tactical meeting, there may be 5 or 6 agenda items in a row that have nothing to do with me. And me trying to make it seem like I'm adding value, which are often hard habits to unlearn, and getting in there and asking a bunch of irrelevant questions or trying to make it seem like it's relevant to my role when I really don't have much to say about it, is actually a really intelligent move. So to be consciously and constructively disengaged is the point. Another way that this shows up is like in a tactical meeting. This happens to me quite a bit, where we're in a tactical meeting, an agenda item comes up, and it's not immediately clear that it has anything to do with me. The agenda item doesn't say, hey, Chris, or hey, one of Chris's roles, something like that. They just kind of are talking about an issue. And I'm like, cool. And I'm doing something else because I'm constructively disengaging. And at some point, the agenda item owner, the facilitator would say, yeah, so Chris, what do you think about that? And I'll be like, oh, yeah, I wasn't listening at all. And I try to do that without any sort of apologetic tone, right? Because that's just this old hang up from that other system of like, oh, I should have been. No, like I should have been prioritizing whatever I think is the most useful place to put my time. And I thought I was doing this other thing, trusting that you guys would do exactly what you did, which was call me out and say, hey, there's this thing actually we wanted your opinion on, or we needed your advice on, or there's a request to you. So unapologetically, I can say, oh yeah, sorry, I wasn't following that. I wasn't listening to anything you were saying. Catch me up. What was it? Okay, so there's this client thing and you have a request. Okay, yeah, maybe, right? And then I can process it that way. So very different than the conventional space. Another version of what this looks like in the governance meeting I actually alluded to earlier, which is just because you have space for a reaction doesn't mean you have to use one, right? Ask yourself that question, like, why am I reacting? Like, is it because I need to? Maybe you do, right? Great. But oftentimes, especially early on, when you start to kind of understand how all of these different kind of upgrade options work together, you may realize like, I have nothing to say about this. This does look fine. I don't need to have my opinion. Like, right, we're not recording that everyone's, registered some sort of opinion on this. None of that matters. So like if it solves their issue, I have no valid objection, so it doesn't impact my role, doesn't limit it certainly in any sort of meaningful way, then why would I waste the group's time? We can get through more items or end the meeting early and get back to just talking like normal people and not having to go through the really awkward governance process. This principle alone would probably solve at least 50% of most of the problems that I see in governance meetings. And what makes them so painful and awkward is people are asking lots of questions that they probably don't need to be asking, providing long-winded reactions, and they probably don't need to use them, just because they don't really kind of understand that, oh, right, my direct path is the objection. I need to ask that and keep that in my mind first and always. And from there may be opportunities where I may realize like, yeah, like the best thing I can do in this situation is to choose to not engage and slow things down for no reason. Okay, so that's the first kind of generic one that applies to both. Another one, just to request a specific check-in prompt. The rest of these aren't they're not in an order that should be suggestive of their importance or value. These are just kind of random. Request a specific check-in prompt means that in both meeting types, we have a check-in round, and it's fairly rare and kind of sad and unfortunate that there's often not very much variation in the prompt that is used. It's your check-in. Maybe the facilitator provides and says, it's here to get present or conscious and attentive for the meeting, so call out what has any distractions or something like that. So I say request because, yeah, this is kind of like more one that a facilitator would be able to do more easily because they're structuring that space. So if they say, hey, for this check-in, I want to use this prompt, then it's much easier. But even as a participant, even if facilitator just says, yeah, Chris, your check-in, I could say, yeah, you know what I would like to do and request of others is I would like to do something like, what are you excited about this week? Right? Like just one thing that you're excited about this coming week. So I'm going to start, I'll do mine that way. And then, it's voluntary, of course, but it'd be cool. I'd really like to hear others. So yeah, I'm really excited about the fact that I'm going to have a couple of days off to spend with my son and my family, even though we're all quarantined, yada, yada, yada. And then the next person can completely ignore it, right? And just, yeah, I'm here, fine. But these are still ways that you can impact the space. Another alternative could be something that you're struggling with, right? Like, or even both. I've had a client do that once. I was facilitating as an external, and they said, yeah, we're used to having these kinds of check-ins. They didn't really call them that, but it was like something that you did well last week and something that you did not do well last week, right? One of each. And that's the prompt that we would like to use in the check-ins. Great, that sounds awesome. That's way better than just like what's going on, right? So if you are feeling that lack of felt sense of connection with participants and there seems to be something missing, this might be something, right? Get creative for a check-in kind of prompt that the facilitator can use. Oops, right, hit the button by accident. All right, skip meetings. I love this one. Ask yourself, like, do I want to go? Again, this is a contrast from like the conventional expectation that, you should want to go, or at least you kind of need to be there because that's where decisions, this kind of group decision-y thing kind of happens. So removing yourself from it says a lot about how, engaged you are with the work, right? That's not the case here. Like the meetings are meant to serve you. So make sure the meetings serve you. Sometimes the meetings just feel awkward and painful because you don't need anything there, but you went anyway because you never asked yourself this question. Like, am I going there for any particular reason? Do I have any tensions to process? Now, maybe one of the tensions that you're feeling is that you want to be available to others. This is probably largely why I go to meetings, is for this reason of like, well, somebody else has requested me to go, or I don't know, I might be helpful to others, and I can be there and we can bang out a few of these really quick instead of having to do a lot of email or something. But make sure it's grounded in like, yeah, first, like, do I want to go? Do I have reasons? And then trust others to request you, to request your presence, your attendance. They can always ask you to prioritize attending as your highest priority, a specific meeting. I actually remember the exact moment when this insight came to me in my kind of holacracy journey. We were having a retreat and I just didn't feel like being social. And I left kind of the house that we were all gathered in and everyone was kind of hanging out and having fun in the main house. And I was going for a walk, feeling kind of down and depressed and kind of like had this own narrative in my head that people were really expecting me to be involved and engaged and having fun with them and playing games or whatever. And here I was being, like an Eeyore and just not being very social. And they're judging me for doing all that, I had this whole story built up. But then it occurred to me, well, like, wait a minute, even if that were the case, and at some point someone said, for the past few retreats, you have, not been involved in these games and things, and you really should be. I could then say like, oh, okay, well, geez, I didn't, like you're just telling me now, if this was several times, right? Like you waited till a whole pattern developed. Like I would have loved to have known that earlier. Okay, well now we might be able to adjust, but I'm not going to feel, guilt because you never told me that whole time. That's actually your responsibility. So if you're feeling tension about that and not telling me, that doesn't really give me much of an opportunity to adapt, right? Or try to help you out and solve that. I would love to know those kinds of things. So with that in mind, you can trust others to request you. And if they are not, then you can pretty safely assume that it's okay, right? Just even try it, experiment with it. Worst case scenario, you have to have a special governance meeting or something to process attention that might have surfaced from a proposal that you weren't there. So experiment with just skipping meetings, making sure that they're serving you. That's a great way, I think, to upgrade the entire meeting experience. And then schedule other meetings. Another kind of common misconception, Holacracy seems to equal only tactical and governance. That's just not the case. Thought partnership meetings, specific project-focused meetings. Now, the way this shows up for the two different, like tactical versus governance, is a little bit different. When it comes to the importance for scheduling other meetings for understanding how to use tactical, is to understand you don't need to cram everything into tactical. Right? There's a lot of other things that you may need to do that just aren't going to fit well in the tactical meeting space. That's not what it is designed to do. It is a backup, sync up opportunity baked in for the circle. And that's it. It should not be construed to be a statement of you don't need other types of meetings. That's not the case. And then as we apply this principle or habit or upgrade option, what have you, to governance, it's a little bit different. This just means understand that the governance meeting time is a very small amount of time, like 0.5% of your time, maybe 1% of the time that you're spending in your work life to do this very high value, disciplined, rigid, structured kind of thing. So this doesn't, again, mean we need to cram in all sorts of other stuff, even if that other stuff is important. The governance space is just a dedicated space where we're going to do just governance. So if tensions surface about other issues that are operational, great, maybe take a note of them and then, grab that person or say, hey, can we meet in a Zoom room real quick to talk about this thing that surfaced, right? Because you're protecting that space in the governance meeting just to do governance. And then finally, call for a facilitator or secretary election if you have to. It's not comfortable, right? Like they do have a lot of impact on the meetings. If your facilitator is not doing well, secretary is not doing well, you kind of have to be willing to be an adult about it, not make it personal, right? There's just a job to do, and you can call for an election. In a governance meeting, nominate a new secretary. There's a chance to explain your reasoning, and you just need to be willing to do it. Again, any participant needs to be willing to do this if needed. Now, before you get there, my recommendation would be to leverage the closing rounds of meetings, governance and tactical, to give feedback to either secretary or facilitator while things are fresh. If you note something that was making something particularly painful, right, you can use that space. It's already there. And a closing round to say what worked well or didn't work well in the meeting or for the role fillers that are involved. Maybe you do that or talk to them in some other capacity before you just jump to an election. But the key is to remember that at the end of the day, they are elected. So if they are a complete dumpster fire of a facilitator and they've been that way for months and you haven't called for an election, I don't know. I get it, but also you have to bear some of that responsibility for not doing anything about it, right? You have pathways that you can use. They might not be comfortable to use, but they are there. So you have to bear some of that responsibility. Well, that was kind of a quick run through. There was a lot, 15 items. I talked quite a bit about them. I'm going to stop here, leave this slide up that has kind of the summary of all those points in case you need to be reminded of what the things we covered. The governance ones on the left in the yellow, the tactical in the middle in the blue, and then the kind of apply to both on the right-hand side. So I'm going to take this opportunity to get a sip of water. And yeah, if you've typed in any questions, if you've had questions as we've been going, I'm going to check the thing, then I can answer them. Or if you have questions now, got about 10 minutes or so, I would love to try to answer them. If you have to drop off, been great to have you. Wish you best of luck in your journey towards, true self-organization. Yeah, thanks, Jen. Cool. So I'll give you a few minutes to type in any questions that you have about some of the stuff I said, or if you want to throw at me a specific case for one of your circles in the meetings and see if I can diagnose what might help, diagnose the issue and figure out what might help, please do so. Okay, cool. I got a few. So one person asked, is the purpose of the agenda or the meeting clear in regards to seeking input or anything like during a tactical section? So the way I'm understanding this question is it clear that someone might want input, or they might want to just provide input to someone? Like, where does that get surfaced? My recommendation is just to surface that as the agenda item owner, right? As you're starting off, people are like, yeah, we're here. And facilitator says, what do you need? And you say, yeah, I just wanted to share some ideas and some input, opinions on something, take it for what it's worth, or I have a strong pitch and I really want to hear what you think about it. Do you agree? Are you going to do it? Any range in there, right? You're just making it clear what I want and just leaning into that. It's your space, so use it. You don't need to worry about getting that figured out in advance. Things like giving input or harvesting input, they do sometimes occur strictly as an agenda item, like this is what I want and this is all I want. But more often, they're just kind of mixed in with a lot of other things, right? A problem comes up and then people just shout out and give you some ideas too. So there can be a mix. The point is just to be clear. If you're just looking to make a pitch to somebody, then just make that clear and do that thing. If you're looking to hear ideas, make it clear you just want to hear ideas. This is the situation. I want to hear ideas, right? You have to make it any more elaborate than that. Just make it easy for people to help you. Cool. 2, in order to ask the facilitator to test an objection during the governance or add an agenda item and request it go next during tactical, do you recommend calling a timeout to make these requests? You know, Stephanie, it's really kind of case by case. The fact that you even asked the question tells me you have enough sensitivity to kind of make that determination for yourself in the moment. So I think that's the best way I can answer it. Yeah, best way I can answer it. Just use your own best judgment. You might get it wrong, but there's just too many variables. Sometimes it makes sense to ask for a timeout. Other times that would just feel needlessly bureaucratic, or, just kind of is slowing things down needlessly. Cool. I didn't get the should inform your reaction. Oh yeah, could you please rephrase it? Yeah, so this came up under the first ask yourself, do I have a valid objection? And then your answer to that question now should inform the kind of reaction that you're giving. And what I mean by that is, if I have a valid objection to the proposal, then I'm probably not going to say much of anything in my reaction, because I'm going to do the objection-y thing later, which is my direct pathway. I use the metaphor often of like going into a restaurant and the seater comes up to you and says, welcome, how are you, well, how's your group doing today? And then I just start going into the things that I want to order. Yeah, like a hamburger, I think she'd like a salad. We'd like, I could do all that then, but the seater's going to be like, okay, great. But I need to actually, that thing you're doing actually goes to somebody else. That's like the server. Once we sit down, you're going to do all of that and they'll get it. You can tell me, but I can't, I don't do anything with that at this point. It's a very similar parallel to me about sharing all this information in a reaction round. It's kind of like, okay, you shouldn't expect the proposer to do anything with any of that. That's not, they had attention. And by definition, they've made a suggestion for something that would solve their tension. So they're done. They're done. And they should just want it to be accepted, right? Like, okay, it's just, I don't know, might not be perfect, might even be barely workable, but it's okay. We can move on and save time for other agenda items. So they shouldn't really care. That's what it means. If you have a valid objection, just use it. And if you don't, that will still inform your energy for providing your reaction, because now you know, I can't stop this. I have no power. I have no power to stop this if I don't have a valid objection. So what am I, like, given that, like, how much am I even going to fight or resist? Maybe the better pathway, the direct pathway, is bring my own agenda item. Aha, I'll bring my own governance agenda item. That's what I need to do. It's not an objection. It's just my own agenda item. In which case, no reaction, right? So that is what I mean by it informing how you react. Cool. Can you tell us about the rep link? They're elected as well. Is this role still hot? Not really. The focus of this webinar was on upgrading the meetings. So rep link is not any more relevant to the context of this conversation than almost any other aspect of Holacracy. That that they're all connected by virtue of being all part of the same system, but it's not really specific to the meeting context at all. Cool. Other questions? Yeah, we're just about done, but I'm happy to take a few more. And if you have to drop off, I was glad you were with us. Oh, I see a few in the Q&A. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I see. Thanks, Ginger, grabbing those. Awesome. Cool. So how do you deal with a lot of tensions? Do we need to put a timer on each tension? So for the tactical, yes, absolutely. Again, this is actually more for the facilitator of how to best address that. If you've got 15 agenda items and you've got, 45 minutes of meeting time left, it's about 3 minutes an item. It's really, really helpful if the facilitator calls that out. It's their job to try to get through all the items. And by get through, I really kind of mean allocate some space and some time to each agenda and each agenda item owner to try to get their needs met. Some amount of time, maybe a few seconds. But they can do that, and they should be doing that using their own wisdom and judgment. So maybe it makes sense to spend, of that 45 minutes that we've got left, to spend 30 minutes on one item that's really hot and really complex, and we've got everyone here, let's do that now, to the detriment of 20 other items that are now only gonna have a few seconds to see if we can come up with something. Otherwise, they're just gonna be processed, outside of that meeting space. So the facilitator really shouldn't be having a sense of the timing or available time, allocating it consciously and intelligently. As a participant, you can mention that, you can bring that in, but that's really more like training or education for the facilitator. That's part of their job, is to be holding to that on behalf of the participants. Yeah, good question. Oh yeah, and then just as an extra clarification, just in case, it's not the case for governance. Governance is a very different energy. Governance, we're just getting through as many as we can in the allocated time, or the time that the secretary is scheduled for that meeting. Cool. If there's any more questions, I'd be happy to try to answer one. If not, I'll go ahead and just start my kind of closing. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. I'm really excited to share these, tips and tricks. Again, not really hacks. They're just kind of things that I have learned, maybe distilled over some time. Maybe some counterintuitive ones, maybe some obvious ones you've already use, some that you don't. I hope you got something out of it. I wanted to make sure we covered a lot of ground really, really quickly. If you have any further questions about how to make your meetings better, then please feel free to reach out on the community of practice, community.holacracy.org. Again, Jen put the link in the chat for you. And you can ask any question there. There's a lot of people on it. I try to get on there and answer questions too. Others are on there, so and may share the issue and have a really great solution for you. So if you ever come up against a problem that's not quite clear how to solve, please don't hesitate to reach out to the community of practice, or again, you can reach out to me anytime. It's very simple. Email address is Chris, CHRIS, @holacracy1.com. And I will either answer it or route it to the appropriate role. I can best answer it. So we had a really diverse group from all over the world. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to cover some of this stuff. I think it's really important, and I hope you got a lot of value out of it. Cool. Cool. All right, great, everybody. Well, I'll leave the room and the video up just for another moment in case anyone happens to need to grab anything out of the chat, or you wanted to make a note on this last slide that I put up. But other than that, we'll be closing the room in maybe like 2 minutes or so. So make sure you do that before we close. Other than that, again, great seeing you all. Please stay in touch. Best of luck in your journey. Take care.